Okay, hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Innovations in Education. My name is Kevin Hogan. I'm editor at large for eSchool News, and I'm glad you were able to find us here out onto the internet. With me today, Tony Spence. Tony is the Chief Information Officer at Muskego Norway School District in Milwaukee. Tony, great to see you. If not in person, at least we've got the Zoom to help us out, right?
Yeah, great. Great to see you again, Kevin. I think this is a great format. This works pretty well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as we were talking before the recording, I've been going through and asking district executives around the country about their not only their response to the pandemic, but their plans to kind of make the most out of the pandemic and improve their own district strategies through there. One interesting thing about Muskego, Norway, you are the first district that I have spoken to who has not at any point gone either hybrid or remote. Is that right?
Correct. Yep, we've been in person this whole time.
Well, that'd be really interesting. Like, let's get started back in March 13th,
Yes.
which seems like was the D-Day for most district officials. Give us a little bit of the state of play where you were at that time and how you have evolved from that time.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we certainly had to keep an eye on how things were progressing around the world, but then more importantly around the country, and then even locally in the Midwest and even into Wisconsin. And we're in a populated area, of course, being in the Milwaukee area, and just all of a sudden things started to rapidly change. And it wasn't like it was off our radar, but we didn't know what to anticipate, as many other systems did not. And we just kept starting to see that things were moving and changing. And before you know it, we had an official decree from our governor that we were all closing schools, going virtual, and had to make that shift rather quickly. And so, boy, the bar was set. And it was a true test for how much readiness we had around technology, how much readiness we had around our curriculum and its strength, and then even as a system, how we could work together to find solutions quickly. So
Yeah. Were you already a one-to-one district?
yes, thank you for
Okay.
asking. 5th through 12th grade having a one-to-one assigned device, mainly Chromebooks. And then our elementary classrooms, 4K through 4th grade, have a one-to-one availability. So they're not assigned devices, but there's access to one in every classroom for every student.
Okay. So you were pretty well advanced when it came to that. So as far as prepared as you could be, you had that in your pocket anyway.
The physical resources were there. Thankfully, our teachers had been working for many years to prepare themselves in terms of the use of being digital, living in that presence. And that was true from our very youngest students from that 4K representation all the way through 12th grade. Not a perfect environment, of course, always room for growth, but I don't feel we were caught off guard, at least in that regard. We felt like we had tools and resources and were able to quickly mobilize with them. And their changes or opportunities for improvement, absolutely. But a lot of credit goes to our teachers and other supporting staff for making those transitions quickly.
And so you had, and I'll assume that was right around the same time that everyone else was having spring break.
Yep, just before. So
Okay. So you had that 2 week kind of interim.
it
But
was
then,
invaluable to have that time, right? Because we were able to kind of press the pause button, if you will,
yeah.
collect and gather what resources and expectations we had for students. Initially, from our elementary classrooms, they had some paper resource materials and some online supplemental materials. But then we eventually merged into one-to-one distribution of devices. So we took 1,300 devices and distributed them to elementary families in about a week and a half.
Wow.
So that seems like a pretty simple process. Like, oh, it's like a lunch. You pass out a lunch, and this would be simple. But obviously, you can understand there's a lot of let's call it process and procedural things that we had to have figured out to make that distribution happen. But families were great, staff were great, and we had a lot of people within our technology and library departments work together to make that happen.
And so were you putting yourself in a position to be ready for a remote setup, or was it just kind of an executive decision that we're going to be going for it?
Yeah, we felt that it was inevitable that the need for digital resource and communication would be there. And so, in other words, the writing was on the wall that this wasn't going to be something short term.
Yeah.
And so that paper version with digital supplementation bought us some time so we could have a process to get that out. Meanwhile, again, 5th through 12th grade, those students were already set up with those devices going home every single day. And we had all of our support mechanisms too. So we had people staffed to be able to do device distribution out, a breakage, a malfunction, anything you name it. they could pick up devices, and we had a very, we'll call it stringent process that we followed as a recommendation of our CDC and district nurse to make sure that there wasn't devices coming back where there was cross-contamination, and they were clean devices going home. So we'd
Gotcha.
have a swap process for 4K through 12 for every single family, just in case there was any breakage or other needs.
One of the interesting parts of conversations that I've had, and in years past, we've had conversations about the topic of digital equity in a conceptual sense, in a theoretical sense, right? For a lot
Yep.
of districts, this spring, that theory became a stark reality, that there were a certain number of students who didn't have access or didn't have devices or any sort of support that way. Is that something that you had to experience as well?
Absolutely. We are fortunate in a way that the percentages of our families that do not have internet access, as an example, as it relates to either the geography of where they live and or the affordability. So, but we do have some rural areas in our district that where access to internet, high speed internet that's reliable is not great. And then also some families that whether they could afford that, and also some families that were having 6 to 8 people in the household and it was overrunning internet. So in other words, supplemental internet was also another thing. So we use a program called Qualtrics, and we had a survey that went out to families right away to determine internet and access needs, as well as device needs. And so we used that and quickly responded to families that needed it. We mobilized with MiFi cards, and then we have them dedicated to the device, and they can only connect to the device that we distribute to. And that means that they use a filtering tool on the Chromebook so that we make sure the internet still maintains that filtering capacity, no
Okay.
matter where or who is using it. And we actually ran out of the access devices that we need, and I ran to a neighboring district. Actually, it's 2 hours away in Appleton. So we know the tech director there, and they were very gracious to provide us with a few that they weren't using. And so we were able to keep up with the demand that we had. So all in all, we had about 40 MiFi devices that were distributed for access in our district, which is not a high percentage, but mind you, every single one of those counted, because as soon as one of those families said, we can't get internet at home, what are we supposed to do? It posed a huge problem. And so now more than ever, that's been exposed, but thankfully we had some solutions to be able to provide.
When you look back at the spring and what I'll let you define it, but I call it, there's almost a lot of districts were in triage.
Mm-hmm.
It just in terms of making connections, getting folks together, state testing, assessment out the window.
Yeah.
It was really as much about a social emotional, not even learning, but just a connectivity between parents. Are there things from your experience that you think that your district will draw out of that and apply going forward?
Yeah, for sure. I think we're yet to determine where we're going to land from this, right? As a system, our practices, where we land in terms of maybe call them change in best practice, an opportunity for more opportunity of efficiency and other things, but also how we care for our people. How you respond in a crisis says a lot about your system.
Hmm.
I'm proud about how we were able to respond to all of our stakeholders, including our staff of all types, including of our students and our families, and to really give them an opportunity to communicate with us what their needs are, and then try to respond to the best of our abilities, of course, to what's happening during this time. And again, so much of this, like you had said, with triage is a perfect word for it. In the moment, we have to be responsive. We can't say, we'll get back to you in a couple of months and let you know what this response could be or what we could do in this situation. We had decisions being made in a matter of minutes. And again, that's where we really benefited from having continuity and contingency planning already in place for things like this, having resources already in place for something like this, having staff being trained for things like this. And we didn't train them for a pandemic, mind you, but we trained them to be versatile, to be mobile. And that certainly has paid off. Also, it takes a village. Every time we look at anything that has been done, if any single person on our team was not available for that, I'm not sure we would have had the same success.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could never say that anything technology related was just about tech. It was about everybody embracing it and supporting it. And the same was for food service and delivering lunches. And the same was true for libraries and getting books out in circulation still, so kids could still have access to great literature. And it took everyone in buildings, all the principals and associate principals and administrative assistants to get those pieces working. And then families, again, the fact that they were willing to step up and just be like, hey, we appreciate what you're doing and we're going to do what we can too. So, I mean, we really had to meet in the middle with them.
Yeah. And in a strange way, that while the pandemic has isolated us all, in a lot of ways, it's brought us together, in a weird technological sense, right?
Yeah.
So let's move into the summertime now. So
Yeah.
we kind of got through the spring, um, unknowns of what the fall is going to be, how your setup is going to have to be, probably listening to the governor every other day,
Right.
and just everyone taking bets on where you're going to be. And the responsibilities came down, it seems to me, to each individual district to decide what
Yes.
they were going to do. Walk us through what that was like.
Similar to how they call snow days, oftentimes county school districts, and of course we're individual districts, not county-based districts, but we will kind of work together and our superintendent will connect with other superintendents about what's happening, where they're leaning, and then kind of make decisions that are in the interests of all.
Yeah.
And so we're fortunate that, yes, we independently work and we will make our own decisions, but we also have a finger on the pulse of what's happening in and around us. And that was crucial. Now we have a bunch of bordering counties like Milwaukee County. We're in Waukesha County. These are two very populous counties, but still, just because of the county line doesn't mean we don't work equally with all of those districts on both sides.
Mm.
So the litmus of what was happening was that we could understand who was doing what and what other ideas were being brought forth and how everybody else was responding to this situation. You kind of understand if you're an outlier or if you're kind of more in that median area. And so as people started to make decisions and figure it out, we understood that our number one thing that we had to figure out was, what does the community want from our school district at this time? Are people fearful of sending their students to school, and therefore if we were to open up, they would say we're not interested? Or did everybody want their kids to go to school, and if we didn't open up or we were virtual, they'd say, where are we going to put our kids?
Mm.
And these are some very common problems. And what we figured out was, first of all, whatever we did, we needed to do it with fidelity. We could not do this haphazardly. It had to be done right. So we thought, let's really be focused. And so when we did our survey, about 87% of our families said they wanted to return to in-person. So the writing was on the wall. I mean, there was the decree, and our board, I would say, concurred that if we could pull that off, that's where we'd want to be. And so every single resource we had went to achieving that outcome, from late spring all the way until, I would say, even a month into the school year, to make sure that we were planning off and doing everything we could to provide deliverables. All summer we were working hard, but our teachers, who are of course very busy, are now being asked to join and come back to school, an environment that they need confidence in as well. And so there's either coercion or persuasion. Coercion being, please just step into the classroom and start your work. Persuasion is, let us sell it to you why we're thinking this is the right choice and why we want to make it safe for you.
Yeah.
And so we went that ladder of the two, and we have a great staff who made those sacrifices and understood, and we did everything in our power to keep them safe. Tons of mitigation measures that were put into place, and also a process that our district nurse and all of her staff have done to really be on top of any probables, any isolated confirmations, and then also the necessary quarantines from a contact tracing perspective. This is a massive project and process that without her and her team, we just wouldn't have been able to pull it off.
Yeah.
So to be able to respond in that moment, in that minute, in that hour, and then respond accordingly, but not over respond, right? You could clear out a whole classroom, but let's really contact trace to the best of our abilities and be precise. And that has meant that we have not had to take out an entire school,
Mm-hmm.
or even the whole district at a time, because we've been able to be precise with that work. So I'm getting a little further ahead, but summer was all about, what are we going to actually do when people are back in school to make sure that we can continue this? Because like I said, fidelity in practice, we didn't want to start and not be able to follow through. Now, of
Mm-hmm.
course, we had plans in place for that, as you would imagine, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But so far, we feel very fortunate we've been able to, again, stay open up to this point.
That is a true accomplishment.
Yeah,
I have to
it
say,
is.
and kudos to you and to all your staff. Now, even if you are back in person,
Mhm.
it can't be the same technology setup that you had going back to school the year before, right? Talk a
Right.
little bit about how you've had to adjust and pivot in terms of, I don't know, AV, in terms of projection
Yeah.
systems, in terms of any of those communications?
Well, it's, sometimes you get lucky, and I'd like to say that there's lucky and leading, and maybe it's a little bit of both. But in this case, we had done a rollout of new AV setups in all of our classrooms, and we have 85% of the classrooms were fully completed. We put the Epson projection systems in, and they're great for us. That's the 100-inch screens. They're very bright. We have a lot of brand new buildings with bright windows, and it's not like we have any issue seeing these things. So we have the largest screen, the brightest screen, the most versatile, and that set the stage for what was going to be in-person instruction. But then it also set the stage for virtual, because running all of our technologies through that meant that we could actually have what I consider to be a very versatile setup. Now, is anything easy? Of course not. The one thing we did add was adding the 4K document cameras into the classroom as well. And that allowed us to project what was happening in the classroom to those that were remote, because oftentimes we have teachers who are teaching both to a virtual audience and an in-person audience at the same time, particularly at our high schools. Obviously, this is a very difficult task.
Yeah.
And so our goal was to make sure that we had high-speed internet. We upgraded to 10 gig. We installed an entire fiber infrastructure within our district 3 years ago, and then connected to a much larger horseshoe around the entire metro area of Milwaukee. And so we drove that work so that we can have that connection and faster speeds. So now we have 10 gig, we have fast Wi-Fi into the schools, we have the Epson projection systems within the classrooms, we have the document cameras that bring that out, and then we have our other software utilities that allow us to use Google Meets and everything else to, again, provide kind of a unified option for instruction. Now, Google Meet is nothing cutting edge, but it's worked really well for us, and that was a nice transition for staff to be able to go and not use a brand new tool that they weren't familiar with and be
Sure.
something they were comfortable with, because that's what we defaulted to in the spring. And then we paid for the enterprise version of that going forward. So we did add new technologies. We definitely added more systems into our district for that arsenal, that we'll call it our toolbox of technologies. But overall, it wasn't a huge learning curve for most of the technologies that we had.
Okay, and so let's be clear about this too. While you provided in-person school,
Mm-hmm.
if a parent or a student wanted to
Yes.
opt and be remote, they were able to do that. So it wasn't like that
Thank you for asking.
13% were out of luck.
12% of our families roughly started off the year attending virtually. And so that was 4K through 12. Now we have about 5,000 students in the district. So give or take, that was about 600 of our students who were attending virtually by choice. And it stayed pretty close to that amount. We might be at about 10% still virtual and 90% in person. And for the most part, we have those supports too. The high school, as an example, uses a separate program. So they're not using our teachers for that. It's called Admentum. Whereas in the middle school and elementary, they are using our teachers with a combination of supports too. So
okay, but they were not on separate tracks.
No, same tracks, right?
So they were following along with what the in-person is, because a number of districts
Only at the middle school and elementary. At the high school, they were on their own separate track.
Okay, so I've been hearing more and more about this kind of virtual academy model that a lot of districts are intending to use. Yep. Even when all this madness is over. Is that something that you're looking at too?
Yeah, we've had to be very serious about what this looks like for us. It's gauging intent and interest and making sure that door stays open for families that are saying, we had a really positive experience with this. We'd like to continue both the flexibility it provides our families, and also sometimes the educational practices are more in line with how that student learns. So yeah, we looked at whether a charter school would be an option for us, or whether or not we would stick with the current formats we're using. And again, it's probably gauging that, how did families respond to it? But we even have a person here in our own district office that is a teacher by trade, but works in a different format here. And she's one of the tutors for our middle school students in the program. And so again, it's just making sure that those supports are in place. And it's not just this, well, one size fits all and everybody's good, right? Okay, we'll talk to you at the end of the semester. And it's really touching base and making sure those kids feel supported, because the families appreciate that too.
You know, at the expense of using cliches, but it's like one of the silver linings, or one of the, the opportunities being pulled from the chaos is these, again, are theoretical things that we've discussed in the past.
Right.
A lot of district executives I've talked to is like, it's almost a guilty pleasure. Like, this is finally given us the opportunity to do the things that we've advocated for years.
Right.
And the school board's kind of like, well, we don't need that, or it's too expensive. And like, now that there's no choice, right?
Yes. The transition, I think, for us has been, we've been very fortunate. Board support's there, budgeting is there, staff have understood the need, but I think it was one of those things where it confirmed the value of what each of these things are, well beyond what we could have imagined in the first place. The value of wireless technologies to be able to stream back and forth, now more than ever, crucial, right? People are more likely to be okay with the power being out than the internet being off. And so because of that, there is no margin for error. And so when we do redundancies for fiber and we have 10 gigs of speed, which seems ridiculous, all of a sudden these things are being tested and pushed and pressured, and uptime needs to be 99.99%. Even 30 minutes of a downtime means that there's that much instructional minutes that are lost. So if we go down, I think what we've done is we've raised the bar on ourselves, that people expect this now to be more operational than ever. And I'm okay with that, because it truly is that confirmation of we have invested properly to get ourselves to this point. But I think you're absolutely right. It is kind of, so it's our coming out party, if you will, that technology isn't something that we thought was, well, that's that kind of nice extra thing. We sprinkle the pixie dust on things, when we kind of want to add some technology flair to it. And now it's like, well, this is actually one of the staples of how we provide instruction right now.
It's the infrastructure.
Yes.
And you've become an internet service provider.
Yeah, that's
basically
true. Really,
Yeah.
great point. Yeah,
Yeah.
good point, Kevin.
Talk a little bit about other positives maybe that you've pulled out along the way here. Like, we should have been doing it this way all along. And any of those examples?
There are. Curricular alignment has been more on point than ever. We have a thing that our two curriculum directors, Christy and Courtney, created a thing that is standards of focus. And they worked with the entire district about this. Occurred before the pandemic. And it's really those, you can call them power standards, summative standards, things like that. And so when we needed to be efficient with how we were providing instruction for K through 12, the standards of focus became more important than ever, because this is what we knew we needed to focus on no matter what, at all costs. These were the parts of our instructional practices that had to be done. And you ask a teacher how a student's doing in the class, and they know more than a test, a state test or anything else. They just know. And sometimes you ask them to describe it, and maybe that's not easy to describe, but they just know. And the best part of that is when the standards of focus were that ideal, we'll call it the center infrastructure, if you will, of the practices that were happening. We didn't have to feel we were hyper inefficient and struggling to do all these things. How are we going to get to this end? We felt more composed, felt more in line with what we needed to do. And actually, because of all of the practices that were happening and the partnerships that were happening with fourth grade classrooms around the district, as an example, now the alignments were there, because they're saying, well, we can take the video instruction that you provided for that math unit, and we can use that over here. And even though I'm in person, I might be able to use that same lesson with what I'm doing here. And so it's very tightly aligned, not only with the curriculum we were teaching, but the pacing that was too. And every teacher has said this to me, every single one, unsolicited. Boy, we have really come together as a level. We have really come together as a building because of this. And so I think it's inspired that same practice to happen going into a non-pandemic school year.
That's fantastic, which is what my final question was going to be. And I always like to end up these conversations with the glass half full.
Yeah.
And thankfully we can now with the vaccines, and things are dropping, and just every day that means my blood pressure is dropping a little bit more, and just kind of looking better towards the future. But give us the state of play for your district, thinking that, if we all stay positive here and everything is best case scenario, what are your setups like now, and how far have you accelerated from where we were last March?
Yeah, if we can stay on this trajectory, and follow the continuum of growth that we've had, I would say, believe it or not, our system's going to be in a much better place than what it was. And everybody's kind of looking at it from a standpoint of all the instruction that was lost and all the opportunities that were lost. But our sports and teams continue to play, our co-curriculars continue to play, albeit in a very different format.
Right.
Our schools were in person, and we've seen the benefits of that, of course. We're very happy with what the experiences are for our kids up to this point. We do surveys with our students to find out how they're doing. We've had a greater focus on social emotional learning than ever. It's not a new concept, of course, but it is new in terms of how much we give in terms of priority. And I think now more than ever, we really have to be paying attention to that, not just because of the aftershocks of a pandemic, but more so just in general, the kind of pressure students feel, the interactions that they have, the supports that they have. And this is good, not only mindfulness from a standpoint of students, but also for staff. And so we've had a lot of great focus on that too. Our student services director has really worked with some outside resources to bring that into our district. So people are sensing that too, that it's not just about getting the job done. It's about taking care of the whole welfare of that person too. And again, meaning that we're a family, we have to stick together in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said that was my last question, but you inspired me for one more.
Sure. Yeah, go
Especially
for
as
it.
with the district that was in person. Um, were was back to school night in person?
We had tours given to families that were new, but the very first back in person was not done all at once. It was in staggered approaches because we had limitations by the state at that
Yes.
time and the number of people that could congregate in one space. So it pretty much limited us to not be able to do that.
Yeah. Because
So
I asked the question because in a lot of my conversations, one of the pluses that people keep talking about is that parent teacher conferences, back to school night, other one-to-one, a lot of student health, telehealth, mental health,
yeah,
IEP meetings that are now done on Zoom will forever be on Zoom. It will never go back in to an in-person because this sort of setup is actually more advantageous to having an equal level conversation than going to the guidance counselor's office or going to the
right.
principal's office. Is that a case that you found with you guys,
It
even though you
is.
were in person?
Yeah, because ironically, even though we're in person, as an example, my door is closed, and most of the time when we meet, we're virtual. So we may have 10 individuals within about 30 feet of each other from a physical space,
Yeah.
but we're all holding virtual meetings because of the obvious. A, we don't want to put anyone in jeopardy of that, but more importantly, we do the ability to share content quickly and easily is much different. Everybody can share their screens, the chatting that happens. We can record if we want to. A lot of times these words are lost in space. And so having those resources there have made us better at, I think, how we communicate too, because a lot of times it's one-way communication. You speak, I listen, I speak, you listen, or hopefully. And in that case, we've had to kind of slow down, but it's also forced us to be more, how would I put it, more focused on the things that mean a lot in terms of our time, getting rid of the things that aren't as unnecessary, the things that we really don't need to be too focused on. And so because of that, we've been more vigilant about just staying on topic, getting things done and moving forward. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have a little fun in our meetings, but
Sure.
it's kind of nice to be to the point. And then again, I keep using the term efficiencies, but it really has provided us more opportunities to be efficient when we meet too. So
That's good to hear, even in an in-person setup, this seems to be a dynamic going forward that will
yep,
stick around. Well, hopefully when we speak again, it will be in person and not
that
via
would be
Zoom
great.
at ISTE or ISTE's going virtual. I just saw that. But let's say ISTE 22.
Well,
Uh,
Kevin, I've always enjoyed being able to partake in all the things that you've offered through both tech and learning, but just in general, the conversations. I genuinely mean that. And I am excited about a time when we can get back to that point, because as much as I'm used to this format, you're right, there is nothing that beats the feeling you get having an in-person conversation about something and just connecting on that. I don't know what it is. It's almost like our bodies have near field communication sensors, right? That kind of just pick up on an in-person communication as opposed to that remote, but it also brings people together.
Yeah.
This is a nice way for people to catch up, but to meet new people, to strike new relationships, I do think that that requires more of the in-person.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there is light at the end of that tunnel, and we'll be back. And thank you again for your time. I know you're a busy guy.
Yeah,
Congratulations on the successes. It's always great to hear
thank you.
about things going well. So and I hope the folks who are listening and watching, and thank you for listening and watching, can take some of these insights and apply them to your own district. So Tony, again, great to see you. Thanks very much, and we'll talk again soon.
Very much a pleasure. Thanks, Kevin. Take care.